Salt spray streaked the harbor wall, blown sideways by rotor wash and small arms fire. Below Captain Elena Markova's canopy, the Adriatic was a dark, churning mirror, broken by 3 fast boats knifing toward open water. 2 packed with men and weapons, the 3rd low in the water, bodies huddled beneath a blue plastic tarp. Her A-10C rolled left, the GAU-8's drum humming alive behind her like a distant storm. On her right, MFD, the village glowed as a no-fire box, red and rectangular, because families were still sheltering in the church and SEALs were fighting through the alleys. On the radio, a breathless JTAC barked for cover fire, his transmission clipped by gunshots. On the harbor jetty, a woman pulled a child behind stacked fishing crates, the wrong place at the wrong time, exactly inside the line Elena needed. Her gloved thumb hovered over the master arm, knuckles whitening. ROE said no fires that could endanger non-combatants in the harbor. Mission Reality said if those boats cleared the breakwater, the hostages disappeared into open sea. Seraph, I need that lead boat stopped now. The JTAC cut in. Elena exhaled once, thin and sharp, eyes locked on the escaping craft. 6 hours earlier. The fog had rolled in from the Adriatic before sunrise, softening the outlines of hangars and turning the ramp lights into yellow halos. Captain Elena Markova liked mornings like this. Muted, orderly, nobody watching too closely. She was halfway through a mug of burnt Italian coffee in the squadron planning room when the duty NCO stuck his head in. "Ma'am, Ops wants you, now!" She set the mug down, already guessing it wasn't a training hop. The operations office was cramped, maps layered over maps, a wall monitor showing the coastline from Trieste, down past a necklace of small Balkan ports. Major Ellis, the ops officer, stood beside the screen, arms folded. His eyes flicked to her name tag, then to the clock. "Elena, good. Sit." She didn't. "What's going on?" He tapped the screen. A coastal village, name vaguely Slavic, too many consonants, glowed with a red ring. "Partner intel says a hostage transfer point. Local militia moving people for money. Our friends on the water want to hit it before they sail." Our friends meant special operations. "What's the window?" "Tonight. Within 6 hours." Ellis zoomed in. The village pressed right up against a small harbor. Tight streets, small fishing boats, a concrete pier. They expected maybe a dozen armed at most. Now we're seeing more movement, more pickups. Could be foreign fighters mixed in. She looked at the harbor. Houses stacked like steps. No open desert, no sterile target area. Civilians still there. "Yeah." He didn't sound happy. "Local police can't evacuate without tipping. So, narrow ROE. PID on every trigger. No fires into the harbor basin unless the JTAC on the ground clears it. That includes gun, rockets, everything." Her jaw worked once. That was exactly the kind of box she'd been put in after Syria, after a man ran out of a building with something tubular on his shoulder, and she'd had 2 seconds to guess, and it turned out to be a rolled carpet. The investigation had called it understandable under stress. Her own brain called it almost catastrophic, almost her fault. "So you want an A-10 overhead while they're in there," she said. "You're the only hog we can get on short notice without pulling from another tasking." Ellis hesitated, then added, "You'll be alone for the first part." Alone. No wingman to cross-check targets, no one to split duties. She felt the familiar pressure across her ribs, like her flight vest was already on. "Other chaos?" she asked. "Maybe later. There's a Viper pair out of Aviano, but they're on a tanker track and their TOT is messy. Rotary is further. Realistically, you're the one constant. So if this goes sideways, I'm the shield. You're the shield, he agreed. For a beat, the room stayed quiet. On the monitor, tiny icons crawled along the coastal road toward the village. The militia pickups intel had picked up. The operation was already moving toward contact, and she wasn't even in the jet yet. Ellis must have seen something flicker across her face, because his tone shifted, a shade drier. You good with this, Captain? There it was, the soft doubt, not a slap, just a reminder of that previous debrief. She straightened. I'm good. I want the tasking. Copy. He handed her a slim folder, targets, comm plan, JTAC call sign. Ground controller is Viking 1 embedded with the SEAL element. He knows you're coming. He'll have eyes on friendlies and civilians. You stay tied to him. Don't freelance. I don't freelance, she said, a little sharper than she meant. Ellis lifted an eyebrow but didn't push. Pre-flight in 10. Ordnance is standard KS unless you want to change it. Talk to armament. Weather's dropping a little over the water, but nothing you can't handle. And Elena. She paused at the door. Clean passes, he said. We can't afford headlines from a fishing village. Clean passes. In a village full of people who hadn't been warned. She nodded and stepped out. The fog outside tasted faintly of salt and jet fuel. On the ramp, the silhouette of her A-10C waited under floodlights, brutish and reassuring. The 7-barrel GAU-8A housing a familiar bulge under its nose. She'd flown this airframe enough to know its quirks. It would put rounds exactly where she told it. The question was whether the world below would ever be that exact. As she walked toward the aircraft, helmet bag swinging against her thigh, she felt the old fear rise, of seeing movement near a target, of not knowing if it was a child, of hearing later that it had been. She forced it down. This time she would stay inside the lines. This time she would make every shot argue for itself. And if the SEALs called for help inside that harbor box, she didn't let herself answer yet. The closer she got to the jet, the less the fog mattered. Ground crew in reflective vests moved around the A-10 like a pit crew. Cables dragged, ladders clanged. The aircraft squatted on the ramp, ugly and patient. Her assigned crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rivas, met her at the nose, helmet in one hand. Ma'am, short notice? He asked. Short enough, Elena said. We're going to the coast, real world, CAS. That changed his posture. Copy. Armaments asking what you want final. We had you for a training config. Of course they had. She glanced toward the weapons trailer where the armament chief, Tech Sergeant Valdez, was already waving a manifest. Captain, we can hang 2 more GBU-12s, but you'll buy 10-15 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes was an eternity if the SEALs hit on time. What's on now? She asked. Guns full, obviously. 2 GBU-12s, pods is fragged. He meant her targeting pod and the standard KS setup. We can add 2 more and maybe a rocket pod if you want to go old school. Elena looked past him, toward the east. The sky over the Adriatic was a low gray ceiling, the kind that swallowed sound and made distances lie. Somewhere across that water, men were already loading weapons into trucks in a village no one had bothered to evacuate. If I take the extra bombs, she said, mostly thinking aloud, I'm late to station. If I don't take them, I'm gun and 2 LGBs in an urban pocket. Rivas said, Ma'am, ops called for fast turn. Weather's not getting better. Valdez, who cared more about giving pilots every option, said, But ma'am, tight streets? You'll want steel you can steer. They were both right. That was the problem. The safest load for the people on the ground required time the people on the ground did not have. She pictured the ops screen, those pickups closing. If the SEALs got pinned without her overhead, they might have to fire closer to civilians than they wanted. If she was overhead but short on precision, she'd have to take riskier gun passes. Her thumb tapped the helmet in her hand, a small, restless motion. In Syria, she'd waited for clearer PID and the chance had nearly passed. Afterward, they'd praised her restraint in the same breath they'd questioned her instincts. Today, she didn't have the luxury of both. We keep current, she decided. No extra GBUs. I want the jet moving in 10. Valdez grimaced but nodded. Roger, we're green as is. Rivas grinned, satisfied. I'll get your forms. As they moved through the pre-flight, the routine steadied her. Intakes clear, panels secure, ordnance safeties, pins. She ran a gloved hand along the ladder, climbed, and settled into the cockpit. The A-10 smelled of hydraulic fluid and old canvas. She slid on her helmet, connected oxygen, powered the jet. Screens woke in greens and ambers. Outside, the fog parted in ribbons over the runway. Ground handed her the latest comm card through Rivas. She scanned it. Primary CS frequency, alternate Viking 1 call sign, the JTAX crypto. A handwritten note at the bottom from Ops. Harbor is sensitive. Don't make us explain, CNN. She snorted softly. She called for start, engines whining up behind her shoulders, the familiar rumble filling the cockpit. Taxi clearance came quick. Ops had obviously pushed her to the front of the line. As she rolled, she caught sight of another jet still in maintenance, panels open, no help coming from that direction. Tower. Hog 2-1, winds calm, runway 27, cleared for immediate. Immediate. They knew too. She lined up, checked gauges, then pushed the throttles forward. The A-10 surged, heavy but eager, tires humming as the runway blurred beneath. At rotation, she eased back, and the Hog lifted into the gray, wings cutting through the low cloud like they were parting curtains. She broke through into a paler layer, coastline a dark line off to starboard. The weather wasn't terrible, just sullen. Visibility good enough to work the coast if she kept her wits. She set course, cleaned up, and called departure. Hog 2-1 airborne, proceeding to task. Copy, Hog 2-1. Be advised, assault element is on infill timeline. JTAC expects you in 15. 15. If she'd taken Valdez's extra bombs, she'd still be on the ramp. She leveled, trimmed, and let the Adriatic stretch beneath her. Alone overhead, 2 laser-guided bombs and a gun that could erase a pickup in seconds. It would have to be enough. The climb-out flattened into a steady cruise, the A-10 humming like a trusted truck in the sky. Below, the slate water of the Adriatic slid by, broken by the white arcs of fishing boats heading in before weather. Elena checked her fuel, then her comm panel. Time to make friends. She dialed the encrypted KS frequency from the card, thumbed the switch. Viking 1, this is Hog 2-1, single A-10C, 10 mics out from your coast. Say status. Static answered. Long, ragged, the kind you got when terrain and atmospherics wanted to win. She frowned, rechecked the FREC, confirmed have quick timing was right. Hog 2-1, this is... The voice broke, came back thinner. ING-1, you're weak and garbled. At her current altitude, the weather layer still fuzzed the coastline. She could stay up here, trust the JTAC to talk her on once she was closer. But she hated the idea of dropping into a village she couldn't see yet. The whole point of her being a hog was that she could look and decide, not just push a coordinate and pray. She keyed up departure, requesting lower along the coast for KS coordination. There was a pause, then... Hog 2-1, cleared down to 2,000 along coastal route. Report feet dry. 2,000 coastal. She eased the nose down. The gray thickened, then parted, and the sea snapped into clearer focus. At this height, she could smell the brine faintly when the cockpit vents cycled. She tried again. Viking 1, Hog 2-1, say again? I am inbound from the southwest, single ship. This time the reply was stronger. The man on the other end, all business. Hog 2-1, Viking 1, good copy now. We are Blackfin Element plus host nation liaison, moving to assault positions. You're early, good. Early was better than late. Copy, Viking. I'll be your only fixed wing for a bit. Understood. No complaint, no surprise. That told her a lot. ROE for you is as briefed. Harbor Basin is no-go unless I clear. Civilians moving sporadically. Expect tight PID. Solid. I've got 2 laser-guided and the gun. What's your immediate concern? Militia pickups on the ring road, he said at once. If they get into the narrow, it'll complicate everything. I'll mark for you when they're in the open. I may need a look at the harbor too. Boats are fueling. Fueling. So intel had been right. She skimmed the coast now. Land to her left, a green-brown rise, water to the right. Far ahead she could start to make out the smudge of the target village, a little bite in the coastline with a single pier. Viking, I can stay on for a while, she said, aware of her own voice, of wanting him to hear the competence in it. We'll keep it clean. He must have picked up the subtext, because his tone softened half a step. Hog, I like clean. I also like my guys coming home. If I clear it, I mean it. That, more than anything, settled her. This was not a cowboy on the ground trying to drag her over a line. This was someone who understood that every round had a headline attached when civilians were nearby. Copy all, she said. What's your timeline? Assault commencing in approximately 6. We're moving now. You may hear local chatter on your guard. Civilians spooked. Don't respond. I'll filter. 6 minutes. She glanced at the fuel again. Comfortable for now. The weather ahead looked patchy. She could work under it if she had to. But the lower she stayed, the easier a stray man-pads shot would be if militants were more ambitious than expected. Stay high, stay safer, or stay low and actually help. She picked the latter. I'll hold at 2,000 just offshore to your south. I can swing east for eyes if you need. Good. Stand by for target talk on when those pickups show. The village grew distinct now. Square roofs, a church steeple, the hard gray of the pier. Through the targeting pod, she could magnify and see motion. Men carrying crates, fuel hose snaked toward a long, low boat. Civilians, too. A couple on a balcony, 2 kids running after a dog. This was going to be a knife fight. Hog, Viking, we are starting infill. There it was, the shift from planning to doing. She could picture them now. Dark shapes slipping through ruined walls, the J-TAC with his radio, counting on a single aircraft overhead. Elena banked slightly to keep the harbor in view and tightened her harness. Viking, Hog 2-1 is on station. The first gunfire reached her as a stutter over the J-TAC's net. Short, controlled bursts, the kind professionals made when they wanted to end a fight fast. Hog 2-1, Viking 1, assault is compromised. Say eyes on road north-northeast of village. Elena had the pod already swung inland. Stand by, I'm searching. The coastline slid off the right side of her canopy as she banked. Through the pod's gray scale, trees and stone walls became clean shapes. And then she saw it. 2 light trucks coming down a dirt approach. Men in the back, weapons upright. A third kicked up dust further back. I have a two-vehicle element on the north approach, possible third trailing, she said. That's them. They weren't supposed to be here this fast. Viking's breath was louder now. He was moving. If they get into the houses, we can't hit them. Boundary for you is the last stone wall before the village proper. Can you take them outside? She brought the nose a little toward land, keeping altitude low enough to see, high enough to not be an easy target. The trucks were still in the open, a strip of road cutting through low scrub. Perfect now. Useless in 90 seconds. Copy, boundary at stone wall, she said. Confirm cleared hot on vehicles north-northeast, outside village. Cleared hot, cleared hot. Friendlies are south and west of you, well clear, I'll mark. A bright sparkle bloomed on her pod image, his laser painting the lead truck. She felt something in her unclench. A good JTAC was a gift. She could have used a bomb, but it was overkill on a small moving truck and risked fragments. Gun was better. Short, mean, contained. Hog 2-1 in hot from the south, she called, rolling the A-10 into her attack heading. The village slid under her left wingtip, the church spire a warning, civilians right there. She kept the pipper ahead of the marked truck. Computing lead. Wind. The GAU-8 spun up with a muted whine she felt in her bones. She squeezed. The gun's roar was a pounding growl through the airframe. Short, controlled. Down below, the lead truck disintegrated at the cab, front end dropping, men spilling. The second truck braked hard, fishtailing. Good hits, Viking shouted. Second truck is backing, can you walk it? I have him. She dipped again, a quicker pass, and stitched the road just ahead of the reversing truck. Rounds chewed asphalt and dirt. The driver thought better of it and bailed, men scattering for the ditch. Vehicles neutralized, she reported, pulling up and out toward the water again. Third vehicle? Third is turning back, Viking said. You just saved us a street fight. The praise hit harder than it should have, not because she needed it, but because it came from someone in the mess, not from a desk. Down in the village, firefights flared and died, echoing up through the hills. Her pod caught glimpses, seals moving between tight stone houses, a militia fighter dropping behind a fishing shack, a woman slamming a door on the wrong corner. This was exactly the environment ROE was written for, and exactly the environment it made hardest. Hog, be advised, Viking said, voice steadier now that the immediate rush was done. We have civilians sheltering in the church and near the harbor warehouses. You do not have clearance into that basin. Copy, no fires in basin without your call, she said automatically. Good, because stand by. There was a rustle, a curt order to someone on the ground. He came back. We're hearing engines at the pier. Looks like they're starting boats. Of course they were. If the trucks couldn't reach, the enemy would exfiltrate what mattered most. Elena pushed her orbit slightly seaward and rolled the pod toward the pier. There, two narrow craft, gray hulls, men moving fast, one of them tugging a tarp into place over a low bundle. Hostages. The pier was directly behind the red no-fire box on her mission brief. She bit the inside of her cheek. Trucks had been simple. Open terrain, clear clearance, clean result. The harbor was going to make her earn it. I have movement on boats, 2+, she said. They're loading something that's not cargo. Yeah, Viking said grimly. That's our real problem. From 2,000 feet offshore, the village looked picturesque. Red roofs, pale walls, the church spire like a finger over the harbor. Through Elena's pod, it was chaos. Hog 2-1 Viking, the JTAC said, breath hot into the mic. We are taking fire from second story, yellow house with green shutters, grid follows. He rattled off the numbers. Civilians believed in adjacent structure to the west. Do not frag west. Copy yellow house, green shutters, stay west cold. Elena slewed the pod. The house popped into view. A square box jammed in a row of similar boxes, laundry still on a line between buildings. A muzzle flashed in the upper window, angled down toward a narrow lane. In the lane, two SEALs hugged a wall, one of them dragging someone, looked like a local policeman, into cover. This was the exact nightmare. Combatants shooting from domestic spaces. Viking? Confirm friendlies south of target building only? She asked. Affirm. Friendlies south. Maybe a family in the house west. East unknown. I can smoke, but it'll take time. They didn't have time. The shooter in the window leaned out again, more confident this time, sending rounds that sparked off stone near the SEALs. Elena ran through options in a heartbeat. An LGB would be too much. Roof collapse, flying debris, no guarantee whom it crushed. Rockets weren't loaded. That left the gun. A short burst inbound from the water, shallow angle so she could rake just the upper story. But shallow meant less margin, a wobble and she'd stitch the wrong wall. Viking, I can give you a very short gun, top floor only, attack heading from seaward, she said. You good with that? Do it. You're cleared hot. Keep it tight, hog. Cleared hot, she repeated, to fix it in memory if anyone later asked. She rolled in from over the harbor, nose dipping toward the clustered roofs. The A-10 liked these passes, slow enough to aim, tough enough to shrug small arms. Elena lined the pipper on the upper corner of the yellow house. Down below, in her peripheral, she saw movement on the pier, civilians tugging crates, oblivious to the gun run about to happen above them. She exhaled. The GAU-8 spoke. Just a crack of thunder compared to what it could do, a surgeon's slice. Rounds walked across the upper facade, chewing stucco and windowsill. The shooter vanished from the frame. The wall held. The west-adjacent house was untouched. Good effect! Good effect! Viking whooped. You took his head off the lane. We're moving. Elena pulled up and out, banking to keep the village in view. Her heart was beating faster than the maneuvers warranted. Not from the flying, from the gamble. One bump of turbulence and someone's kitchen would have worn 30 millimeter. On the net, a second voice cut in. Female, accented, probably the host nation liaison. Civilians are scared. They are calling. Children crying in the church basement. Tell aircraft no bombs. The transmission bled over her frequency because comms in small wars were never perfectly clean. Elena swallowed. That was the sound she remembered from Syria. Not English, just fear, carried on a net it wasn't meant to be on. Viking hog, I copy civilian traffic. I am guns only unless you clear otherwise, she said, making the promise out loud. Appreciated, Viking said, then his tone sharpened. Be advised, new contact. Possible mortar team setting up north edge of the village near the schoolyard. That's inside your no-fire. Of course it was. Can you move them? She asked. Working, he said, muffled orders in the background. They're using the school wall for cover. If they get tubes up, they can hit our boats and the pier. So this was the rhythm of the night. She threaded clean shots through a maze of lives, and the enemy kept sliding into places she couldn't hit. Copy your mortar, Elena said, leveling into her racetrack orbit again. I can give you a show of force over that corner if you want noise. Yeah, scare them. Buy me 2 minutes. Coming right. She dropped lower again, this time not to shoot, but to roar. The hog swept over the schoolyard, big and menacing, Engines loud enough to rattle windows. She popped flares, bright flowers of light in the gray afternoon. An unmistakable signal to anyone with sense that death was close. Her RWR stayed clean. Below, the men who had been unfolding a tube froze, then scattered for cover. "Mortar team is moving off," Viking reported, relief evident. "Thanks, but they'll be back." "They always are," Elena murmured. She climbed back to her working altitude. Even from up here she heard, faint over the mixed nets, a child wailing in some stone basement. It sank under her skin. "Hog, heads up," Viking said. "We're getting word of more equipment pushing toward the harbor. If they set up indirect again near those protected buildings, we're going to run out of polite options." That was the hook, she knew. The moment when paperwork and reality would collide. They didn't stay gone for long. 10 minutes after her flare pass scared them off the school wall, Viking came back on, breathless and annoyed. "Hog 2-1. Mortar team is reconstituting on the north side of the school. Same grid. They're stubborn." Elena already had the pod angled there. The image bloomed. 3 men, one of them hauling a tube, another with a base plate. All of it laid out practically against the school's outer wall. The building had big windows, posters visible inside, classrooms. Someone had probably told the militants, "The foreigners won't shoot near here," and the militants had believed it. She said, "I have them. They're hugging that protected structure." "Affirm. I cannot clear you hot there," Viking said, tone tight with apology. "If you drop something on that wall, we're all doing paperwork for 6 months." That was the math. If she broke the box, even to save friendlies, everyone would scrub her name for intent. If she didn't, the mortars might maim the very civilians the box was meant to protect. She angled her camera to check the harbor. SEALs were starting to move people, some clearly non-combatants, toward a safer corner. A mortar round falling among them would undo the last half hour. "Viking, what's your ability to maneuver on them?" she asked. "Limited. We're tied up clearing the south end. I can't spare a team for a north push yet." So it was her problem, and she was handcuffed. She keyed up the airborne controller frequency. "Crow, this is Hog 2-1 on station over Target Village. We have renewed indirect threat inside designated no fire adjacent a protected structure. Requesting guidance." Crow, an AWACS voice, cool and far away, answered. "Hog 2-1. Negative on fires inside that box unless ground clears. Recommend non-lethal disruption. Be advised, tanker support is delayed 15. Watch your fuel." So there it was. Double pressure. Can't shoot and can't stay forever. "Copy all," Elena said, jaw tightening. She rolled the hog toward land again. "Viking hog, I'm going to give you another show of force, low and loud, flares. That's all I'm cleared for." "Understood," he said. But disappointment edged his voice. Not at her, at the situation. She dropped the nose and came in low over the village, lining up so that her shadow would cross right over the schoolyard. The A-10 thundered in, engines bellowing between stone walls. She punched out flares, bright, hissing comets tumbling between roofs. To anyone below, it would look like the angel of death was picking a spot. In the pod, she watched the mortar team panic. One man snatched up the tube and ran for the corner. Another dove behind a parked car. They knew exactly what the jet could do, even if right now she wasn't doing it. "Mortar team is breaking again," Viking reported. "That's good work." "It's temporary," she said, circling back out to sea. "They'll keep trying as long as they think you're exfilling by water." "Yeah," he agreed. Then, after a beat, quieter. I know you could smoke them if we weren't tied to this ROE. He did know. It made it worse. Being seen and still having to hold back. Let's keep it clean, she said anyway. Tell me the second you can push someone up there. Will do. She glanced at her fuel. The number wasn't scary yet, but it was heading that way. A-10s weren't bottomless, and every low, fast pass burned more. She flipped back to the controller. Crow, Hog 2-1, confirm tanker delay. Hog 2-1, Crow, tanker is still 15 out from being useful to you. Recommend you consider RTB or divert in 20. 20 minutes. Not enough for a leisurely orbit while the ground force sorted out every hidden gun. She looked back at the village. The SEALs were making progress. Clusters of enemy fighters were gone now, streets a bit calmer. But every time they moved civilians, a new threat popped up. Without her overhead, those threats would grow teeth. She pressed the radio again to Viking. Be advised, I may have to push for fuel in 20. I will stay as long as I can. Copy, he said. There was a smile in his voice despite the fight. You've already stayed longer than most. It was a compliment, but it carried a hook. If she left, anything that happened after would feel like abandonment. She recentered the pod on the school. The mortar team was gone again. Good. Bought them minutes. Minutes weren't hours, though. She set her orbit a little tighter, choosing headings that would let her dive in fast for another scare run if they came back. Over the net, far away but insistent, she heard another voice from Crow reminding aircraft of fuel states. She ignored the undertone of scolding. This was the part no one liked to write down. Sometimes you protected civilians by terrifying them. Sometimes you saved lives by not shooting. And sometimes you paid for that restraint later in blood or blame. Hog, Viking again, the JTAC called. We're about to start moving toward the harbor for exfil. If they see us, they'll try that mortar again. Understood, Elena said. I'll be here. She glanced one more time at her fuel, did the math in her head, and realized what it meant. If anything else popped up, boats, guns, another truck, she would have to choose between staying and having enough gas to get home. That choice was coming at her as surely as the coastline. The warning didn't come as an alarm. It came as numbers sliding the wrong direction. Elena glanced down at her fuel totalizer and did the quick mental subtraction pilots did when they didn't want to admit they were tight yet. She called it in before anyone could accuse her of hiding it. Crow, Hog 2-1, State Fuel, approaching bingo for RTB profile, holding over Coastal Village, Crow answered like a school teacher. Hog 2-1, Roger. Tanker still not in your lane. Recommend you proceed outbound now to ensure safe recovery. Outbound now meant leave the SEALs at the exact moment they were trying to peel away from the built-up area and move toward the harbor. On any raid, that was the exposed part. Getting out after everyone knew you were there. Elena rolled slightly to keep the village in her canopy. It looked calmer, but she knew it was the calm of people loading magazines and changing angles. Crow, Hog, ground element is still in contact and beginning movement to exfil, she said. I can give them more time. Crow didn't love that. Hog, that's a negative recommendation. You don't have tanker support. You have divert options to the north. Divert. Land at some other NATO strip, safe, fueled, debriefed, and later explain why she'd left. She pictured Viking's tone if she said, sorry, had to go. Not angry, just tired and a little alone. So she went to the person who actually needed her. Viking Hog, what's your situation for fire support if I depart? His answer was instant, which told her he'd been braced for this. If you leave now, we have nothing overhead. We have boats inbound, but they're not here yet. We still have bad guys north. I can't move civilians without your umbrella. There it was, plain. He wasn't saying, be a hero. He was saying, your presence changes enemy behavior. She looked at the fuel again, at the coastline, jagged, unfriendly to forced landings. A-10s were tough, but they needed somewhere to roll to a stop. If she stayed too long and then had to climb to a tanker that still wasn't there, she'd be scraping numbers. She thought of Syria, of being second-guessed by people who hadn't heard the shots. Maybe this time, if she was going to be second-guessed, it would at least be for staying. She thumbed the radio back to Crow. Crow, Hog 2-1. I will remain on station for ground element. I acknowledge fuel. I will call when departing. A pause, then the resigned voice. Hog 2-1. Understand you're remaining. Advise at Joker. Keep us updated. They didn't like it, but they weren't up to their knees in Adriatic seawater with militia on the banks. She was. Viking Hog. I'm with you until I can't be. He actually laughed. A breathless, disbelieving laugh over gunshots. Copy, Hog. You're making friends down here. Her orbit tightened, more economical, minimizing throttle movements. Every pound burned now was one she wouldn't have later if something broke. She eased her scan over the harbor. That was when she saw it. A different kind of motion on the pier. Not panicked civilians, organized loading. Two of the same narrow craft she'd seen earlier were now fully manned. One had a tarp in the bow, hostages or something they didn't want shot. Men in mismatched gear through lines, an engine coughed to life. Viking, Hog has renewed boat activity at the pier, she said. 2 craft, looks purposeful. Yeah, we heard engines, he said, voice instantly harder. That'll be them trying to get their prize out while we're moving. Your ROE on the basin still holds? She asked, even though she knew. Still holds unless I clear. I've got friendlies within 100 meters, civilians closer than that. So the enemy had watched, learned, and chosen the one route she couldn't freely hit. Hog, be advised, Crow cut in again, businesslike. If boats leave territorial waters, we can get you relief, but you cannot chase them low for long on current fuel. I copy, she said, eyes tracking the lead boat as it nosed away from the pier. I'm monitoring. She could feel the trap closing, fuel down, enemy going maritime, friendlies still in range of anyone with a mortar or RPG. She'd chosen to stay. Now the fight was going to make that choice hurt. Viking Hog, keep me posted on your movement. I have eyes on 2 boats prepping to depart. Roger, he said. We're stepping toward the harbor now. It's gonna get messy. Messy was fine. Messy she could fly. She trimmed, set the Hog in a patient, watchful circle, and watched the first boat pick up speed. The harbor looked smaller the closer she studied it. From altitude, it was a neat bite out of the coast. In the pod, it was a maze of hulls, ropes, and human beings who had not been told to stay inside. Hog, Viking, the JTAC called. We have positive on hostile craft departing now. At least one with possible hostages on board. They are using civilian traffic as clutter. I have eyes, Elena said. The lead boat was long and low, engine wake foaming white as it pushed toward the mouth of the harbor. A second boat was still turning, crew arguing with someone on the pier. A third, smaller civilian fishing boat drifted right where she wanted to shoot. ROE still in effect, Viking reminded her, even though he didn't want to. I can clear you if you have a clean line. I do not have that line right this second. She could have cursed. The boat was gaining speed, and every knot it gained meant more time and fuel to chase it, more exposure for her. If it cleared the harbor mouth and hugged the coast, she'd have to dive in low along the water. Prime man-pads territory. She ran through weapons. Gun, accurate but at this range and angle, with civilians on the pier and a floating obstacle, it was asking for a round to ricochet, or for her to have to drag the burst across an unintended target. Bombs. Too big, wrong environment. That left the Maverick on her pylon, made for hitting small, hard, moving things. Viking, I can prosecute with Maverick on the lead craft once it's outside the inner basin, she said. I need 30 meters of water clear to either side. Stand by, he said. She heard him talking to someone on the ground, moving people. Then, you have civilians on the pier still. I can't clear you inside. The lead boat crossed an imaginary line in her mind, past the clustered fishing skiffs, into a slightly wider lane, edging toward the breakwater. This was the gap. Viking, lead boat is now at harbor exit, less civilian clutter, she said, letting him hear the urgency. If it clears, I may lose geometry. He understood. Hog 2-1, cleared hot on the lead hostile boat, seaward side of the breakwater only. Friendlies and civilians are now behind hard cover. Cleared hot, Maverick, she confirmed, because KS lived and died on echoes. She rolled the A-10 to put the harbor at her 2 o'clock, slewed the seeker onto the boat. The display showed the box dancing for a second as the missile tried to track the moving wake. She forced herself not to rush. Get a good lock, then shoot. The boat's bow lifted slightly as it hit the swells outside the breakwater. Perfect. Tone. Rifle, she called, and the AGM-65 dropped from her wing, motor igniting and driving it down toward the waterline. She followed it on the screen, breath held without realizing it. The missile streaked low, then punched into the boat just abaft the bow. A sheet of spray and fragments kicked up. The boat lurched, spun, began to settle. Men were in the water, clinging to wreckage. Splash, good hit, Elena said, exhaling. Target disabled outside breakwater. Viking came back fast. Beautiful. You just stopped them from getting their package out. We will attempt to recover whoever's in the water if they're not shooters. That last line made the difference. He was thinking like she was, worried about people under tarps who hadn't chosen any of this. But the fight didn't pause to congratulate them. The second hostile boat, seeing what had happened, aborted its turn toward the mouth and instead nosed in closer to the pier, trying to use the civilian craft as hard cover. That one she could not touch, not without raking the entire marina. Hog, second boat is mixing, she said. No shot. I see it, Viking said, voice gone tight again. We'll handle from ground if they stay. Copy. She was about to climb a little, extend her orbit to get a new look angle, when her RWR chirped, a high, needling tone that didn't belong to search radar. A ground unit in the village had woken something up. Her training labeled it before she had to. Man-pad's signature. Someone somewhere below had just decided the angry gray airplane was the real problem. Hog 2-1, you have possible IR threat from the village, Crow cut in, which meant they'd seen it too on some overhead sensor. Recommend you go higher and offset. Elena didn't argue. She banked sharply seaward, dumped flares in a fast, practiced sequence, and added power to climb away from the harbor. The A-10 wasn't a fighter, but it could still get out of the way of a shoulder-fired missile if the pilot wasn't lazy. Viking, Hog, I'm taking an IR poke from your area. They do have man-pads in play. Understood, he said, not surprised. We've stirred the hornet's nest. From her higher perch, the harbor looked calmer again. Smoke from the destroyed boat drifting, people pointing, men scrambling to salvage. Calm was a lie. Calm just meant the enemy was changing tools. She checked her fuel again. Lower now, thanks to the climb and the shot. She'd bought them the most valuable thing, preventing an escape. But the enemy was adapting, and every minute she stayed made her a bigger target. "Hog 2-1, Crow said, less patient now. "With man-pads present and your fuel state, recommend you plan egress in the next window." Elena looked down at the harbor, at the SEALs starting to pull control over a space that had been enemy minutes ago. If she left now, the enemy boats that were still hugging civilians would have more freedom. If she stayed, the next missile might be luckier. "Copy recommendation," she said, eyes never leaving the coast. "Stand by." Below, the fight was about to tilt again. The first indication wasn't visual. It was the RWR's insistent tone and the way her gut tightened from muscle memory. Elena had flared as she climbed, but whoever was on the ground with the launcher had waited, smart enough to let her first decoy string burn out. Then, in the corner of her canopy, she caught the telltale, a thin, bright tongue rising from somewhere back in the village, hunting the hottest thing in the sky. "Missile! Missile! Missile!" she called, even though no one was up here with her. Her hands moved before the words were done. Nose down, hard break away from the source, more flares popping in a staggered curtain. The A-10 groaned through the turn, wings loading up. Outside, flares tumbled like burning coins. The missile chased the brightest heat it could find. One of her flares blossomed, and the seeker head, dumb but eager, swerved for it. Elena kept the brake in, not trusting luck. The missile speared past and burned out harmlessly over the water. "Hog 2-1, Crow, confirm you just took an IR shot?" the controller demanded. "Affirm, single man-pads from village center," she said, breathing a little faster. "Decoyed. No hit. Recommend you climb to a safer altitude and offset to seaward," Crow said immediately. "IR threat is active." That was the safe play. Go high, push out, make them waste shots. But from high and out, the harbor turned into a gray Lego set. She wouldn't be able to tell which boat was hiding hostages and which was a fisherman trying not to die. She leveled at a compromise altitude, higher than she'd been, lower than Crow would like. "Crow, Hog. I can climb a bit, but I still need visual on harbor for ground element." "Understood," Crow said, which meant we don't like it, but you're the one bleeding if it goes wrong. Down below, Viking came on, urgency back. "Hog, confirm man-pads?" "Confirmed," she said. "You've got at least one IR launcher in your area. Probably more." "Copy. We're starting exfil to boats now. That launcher is our biggest threat. If he gets an angle on our craft, we're in trouble." So they were moving. Of course they were. She'd killed one boat, so the enemy would try to punish the departure. That was when special operations units were most breakable, when they had civilians with them, when they were focused on getting out, not killing. "Viking, can you mark suspected man-pad's position for me?" Elena asked, slewing her pod over the village again. "I can't shoot him if he's hugging a protected building." "Negative, he was mobile," Viking said, frustration clear. "Somewhere between the pier road and the central square. They saw you hit the boat and decided to SWAT you." Mobile, hugging civilian walls, exactly the kind she couldn't legally erase. Her mind flashed back to Syria, the rolled carpet mistaken for a launcher, the debrief questions about positive ID. Now she had a real launcher and still couldn't just kill it. She tightened her orbit, this time staying a little farther seaward, angling her passes so that she presented less predictable targets. Every time she cut back toward the harbor, She'd dump a pair of flares preemptively. Wasteful, but alive. Viking? Status on exfil? She asked. We have priority personnel and at least 6 non-combatants moving to water, he said. Gunfire cracked in the background. We need you visible. Your presence is deterring some of them. Visible meant low and obvious. Exactly what the guy with the launcher wanted. She nosed in again, lower than Crow would sign off on if he could see the altimeter. The village opened under her, all stone and tile, and the thin wake of her earlier maverick strike drifting out to sea. She wanted eyes on the road leading to the pier, wanted to see if any fighters were trying to flank the SEALs. If she stayed out over the water like a good pilot, she wouldn't get that. Hog, Viking, contact, north of Harbor Road. 2 technicals trying to reposition to fire on the pier, he called suddenly. I don't have line of sight for long. She swung the pod. 2 pickup trucks, bed-mounted guns, nosing through an alley that emptied toward the harbor. If they reached the open, they could chew up the exfil boats, kill civilians and SEALs alike. Can you clear me? She asked, already rolling. You are cleared hot on the technicals if you can hit them before they get to the waterfront, Viking said. No fires past the first T intersection. Cleared hot, she echoed and ran in. She kept the pass fast, shallower than ideal, because she was more afraid of the unseen second launcher than of missing. The Pipper walked across the lead truck, and she gave it a short GAU-8 burst. The pickup exploded in splinters, bouncing off walls. The second truck braked hard, men diving. She broke away immediately, yanking seaward, flares spitting behind her, waiting for the second IR streak. Nothing. Good hits, Viking shouted. That was the lane, we're crossing now. Copy, she said, heart hammering. Hog 2-1, Crow cut in, more insistent. Your fuel is now at Joker. You must plan egress. She checked. Joker indeed. Not yet bingo, but the slope was bad. If something forced her to maneuver hard again, she'd eat the margin. Crow Hog. I will depart once ground element is off the pier, she said. I am not leaving them under small arms and man pads. A short silence then. Hog 2-1, your determination is noted. Determination was one word for it. Down below, she saw figures, dark wetsuits, lighter clothes, hustling down to the water. Some were being half-carried. That would be hostages or civilians. Enemy fighters were still on the periphery, but they were ducking, thinking twice because the jet was still there. Then Viking's voice snapped, high and sharp in a way it hadn't been all night. Hog, Viking, be advised. We have an emergency exfil situation. One of the boats is overloaded, and we are still under observation. I need maximum cover over the harbor right now. So, fuel low, IR threat alive, and the most fragile phase of the operation just started. Roger, Elena said, bringing the Hog back toward the danger. I've got you covered. The village fight was losing volume. Fewer rifles, more shouting. That was usually the sound of people leaving. From her orbit, Elena watched figures spill from the alleys toward the waterfront. SEALs in dark gear, a couple of limping men in civilian coats, 2 women clutching children. A waterfront meant exposure. There were fewer walls there to hide behind, and the enemy knew it. Hog 2-1, Viking, the JTAC called, voice clipped but not panicked. We are commencing mixed evac to boats. We have non-combatants in the group. I need you visible overhead. Copy. I'm right above you, she said, angling the Hog so her shadow and noise would drag across the pier. The A-10's bulk and snarl were as much a weapon as the gun. People tended to keep their heads down when it circled. Her pod showed the pier in layered gray, friendly operators putting people onto two RHIBs, a local fishing boat being commandeered as overflow, and, to the side, 3 civilian skiffs whose owners were either too scared or too stubborn to leave. The water was getting crowded. Then she saw the problem. Viking, Hog, be advised, small motorboat with 3 military-aged males departing from the north side of the harbor. They are maneuvering to trail your evac craft. Yeah, I see them, he said, annoyance creeping in. Those are not ours. The boat in question was clever, keeping speed modest, wake small, using other hulls as moving cover. A man in the bow had something long on his lap, wrapped in cloth. RPG, maybe just an oar. That was the kind of ambiguity that got people killed or court-martialed. Viking, I can engage if you clear me, Elena said, already slewing the pipper in her mind, plotting a shallow approach that would let her rake just that hull. Negative, Hog, he said immediately. You do not have positive hostile separation. Civilians and friendlies are inside your cone. Hold. She clenched her jaw. Down there, the enemy boat was sliding into the exact wake of the RHIB that held at least one woman and a kid. If that forward man had an RPG and fired from that position, fragments would tear through everyone. Viking, if I let him stay there, he can shoot your lead boat in the transom, she said. I can make it a very short burst. Hog, I said hold, he snapped, not angry at her, angry at geometry. We're still loading people. You hit now, we answer for it. She sucked in a breath through her teeth, let it out slow. This was every worst part of Cass at once. Capability, denied by context. Holding, she said, and the word tasted like metal. Below, the SEALs pushed the last of the civilians onto the second RHIB. One of the operators looked up, maybe at her, maybe at the noise, and waved the boat off. Engines revved, lines slipped, boats began to nose toward the harbor mouth in a staggered file. Behind them, the suspicious motorboat matched, like a remora following a shark. Viking, they are shadowing you, she warned. Understood, he said. We have guns on them, but if they fall back or break wide, I'll clear you. So she circled, impotent, watching a threat she could erase in less than a second glide alongside the very people she'd stayed for. Her fuel was lower. Her RWR pinged now and then as ground fighters swept the sky with whatever they had left. She dumped a couple of flares on each turn out of habit. Her mind flashed back. Different village, different war. A man running with something on his shoulder. Her hesitation. The later faces around a table asking, Captain, what made you sure? She hadn't been. She'd guessed. This time she wasn't guessing. This time she knew the boat was bad, and she was still not firing. Hog, Viking, the JTAC said suddenly, tone sharpening. Stand by, we may get you clearance. Then everything sped up. The lead RHIB accelerated to clear the breakwater, throwing a bigger wake. The trailing hostile boat used that moment to break out of line, gooses its engine, and cut toward open water on a slightly wider arc, just far enough from the civilian cluster that, for 3 heartbeats, the sea around it was blue and empty. Elena's eyes locked on it. Viking, Hog has clear water around the hostile boat. Repeat, clear water, she said, already rolling the A-10 left, angling for a firing solution. Request immediate clearance? He was moving too, his breath loud in her headset. Stand by. Friendlies in the turn. The boat's bow lifted, spray sheeting off as it hit the swell outside the harbor. If it got another 100 meters, it could snake along the coast, behind rocks, harder for her to hit without a crazy low run. Inside the boat, the man in the bow turned back toward the pier, maybe to fire, maybe to cover, maybe to threaten the captured. "Viking!" she snapped. "I have the shot now!" There was a half-second of comms chaos, other voices reporting civilians, someone yelling about incoming on the far side of the village. It all piled in her ears. She rolled the hog harder, nose dipping toward the escaping boat. Down below, she caught a flicker of color on the pier, a woman pulling a child behind stacked crates, right on the margin of her attack line. Exactly like the cold, open image. Her gloved thumb hovered over the master arm, knuckles whitening. And Viking hadn't cleared her yet. The harbor fight had stretched longer than anyone wanted. Boats were staggered out now. First RHIB clear, second weaving through chop, a commandeered local craft lumbering behind with too many people aboard. Elena kept her orbit low enough to be seen, high enough to pretend she wasn't daring a second missile shot. Then someone on shore got brave. As she came through on another seaward-to-land leg, nose canted so the pod could look down the pier, a string of tracers reached up from an alley near the waterfront. Not heavy AAA, more like a 12.7 or an impatient guy with a mounted gun. Most rounds stitched empty air. One didn't. The A-10 shuddered, more insult than agony, but a warning light blinked amber on her panel. "Damn it!" she hissed, leveling out and banking hard seaward to get out of the beaten zone. She checked the panel. Hydraulics B showing low pressure. Not zero, but not where she liked it. "Hog 2-1, Crow. We saw hits on you. Say status." She took a breath, ran the checklist in her head. A-10s were built for this. Double hydraulic systems. Manual reversion if things got truly ugly. The left wing looked intact in her mirror. No fuel streaming. The jet was flying steady. "Hog 2-1. I have minor battle damage. High DB is low, but I am controllable," she reported. "I can remain on station." Crow didn't buy that without protest. "Hog, with battle damage and low fuel, RTB or divert is recommended." Recommended. Meanwhile, below, the last civilian heavy boat was still inside the harbor mouth, and enemy fighters were still darting between buildings, looking for angles. She switched to Viking. "Viking, Hog. I've taken some fire. I'm still here." "You're a champ," he said, genuine. Gunfire crackled behind his voice. He was still exposed. "We're almost clear, but they're trying to bring something down to the water again." Of course they were. If they couldn't get their prize out 5 minutes ago, they'd try again now, hoping the foreign aircraft was spooked. Elena glanced back at the shoreline. The shooter who'd hit her had chosen well. He'd fired from beside a civilian dwelling, under a balcony. She could see the spot clearly in the pod. 1 2-second burst from the GAU would have flattened the gun and half the facade. But a woman stood on that same balcony now, clutching a phone, staring in shock at the sky. So, no retaliation, eat the damage, keep flying. She pushed the Hog back toward her working orbit, testing the controls. A bit heavier on the stick, but responsive. She could do this for a few more minutes. She just couldn't start yanking and banking like a teenager. "Crow, Hog. I will depart when ground element is feet wet and no further hostile maritime movement is observed," she said, making it sound as professional as she could. "Current damage is manageable." A pause, then the reluctant reply. "See Hog 2-1, copy your intent. Report immediately if status worsens." She let the coast slide under her again. The first 2 friendly boats were now properly outside, angling toward a point where other assets could link up. The slower, overloaded local boat was the problem, It wallowed, engine straining, wake wide. Perfect target. On the near side of the harbor, tucked behind a warehouse, movement caught her eye. She zoomed the pod. There, a narrow, fast boat, different from the others, with men hurriedly pulling a tarp over the bow. Under the tarp were shapes, too small and too still to be crew. Someone on the pier shouted at them to go now. "Viking Hog, I have a new fast boat prepping on the east side of the harbor, partly masked by the building," she called. "They are loading under a tarp. I assess hostages or human shields aboard." Viking swore, not bothering to mute. "They're still trying. I don't have a team in position to stop them from shore." The boat driver yanked the starter. The engine coughed, then caught. The boat began to edge away, hugging so close to the wall that Elena couldn't get a clean angle from her current orbit. Fuel low, hydraulics dinged, threats still in play. This was the exact setup every ROE writer feared. An enemy platform deliberately using non-combatants as armor in a harbor with civilians in sight, while a single KAS platform with battle damage was the only thing watching. She dipped lower, careful, smooth, not asking the wounded system for more than it could give. The A-10 responded, steady. She could make one, maybe two more decisive runs tonight before prudence and fuel forced her away. "Hog, that boat cannot be allowed to clear the harbor," Viking said, voice hard as stone now. "If it does, they'll move the hostages and we're back to square one." "I see it," Elena said. The boat was almost at the same point the previous one had been before she'd killed it with the Maverick. Only this time the water around it was not empty. A civilian dinghy drifted lazily just ahead, and a kid, just a kid, sat on the edge of the pier with his hands over his ears against the noise. "I do not have a clean shot yet," she said, hating the admission. "Understood," Viking said. "I can try to push civilians down, but that will take time." Time she didn't have. Her fuel numbers blinked again, a quiet reminder that she was flying on borrowed minutes. Hide B held steady at its lower reading. No active leak, just damage. She thought of what Ellis had said that morning. "Clean passes, we can't afford headlines." And she thought of the boat below, carrying people who would become leverage or video props if she let them go. "Viking," she said slowly, "if they clear, I will have to engage them outside like before." "Roger," he said. "And if they hug a civilian craft when they clear, then we have the worst case," she thought. "Then we'll make a call," she answered. She nudged the Hog back out to sea to set up for the angle she'd need if the boat broke from the wall. The wounded jet grumbled but obeyed. Behind her, the sun was dropping, washing the water in dull silver. Ahead, the hostile boat eased toward the mouth, a tarp full of lives on its bow. She was hurt, low on gas under restrictive ROE, and still, she stayed. The boat chose the exact moment the harbor traffic thinned to make its run. It slipped off the wall, engine rising from a cough to a hard whine, bow lifting as it aimed for the same gap the first boat had tried. The tarp over the forward section ballooned in the wind, held down by two kneeling figures. One of them looked back toward the pier as if to taunt anyone watching. "Hog! Viking! Hostile boat is moving! Repeat, it is moving!" the JTAC called. "We are still displacing civilians. I do not yet have clean clearance." Elena was already banking, setting up an aggressive, descending run from seaward. The damaged hydraulic system complained but held. Below, on the pier, she saw it again. The woman and child behind the stacked crates. The kind of innocent clutter ROE writers drew big red boxes around. "Viking, if I wait, I lose angle," she said, voice tight. "Stand by," he said, and she could hear him shouting on his end, trying to push people flat, get operators to aim, do 6 things at once. Civilians are still. The boat hit the mouth of the harbor. If it could clear another 50 meters, it could turn along the rocks and she'd have to chase it low, past the village, right into the envelope of whoever still had a launcher. This was it then. The moment she had been trying to avoid since Syria. The moment where there was no perfect answer. She rolled steeper, nose down. The A-10's big wings bit into the air. From this angle, she could keep her burst short and downward, minimizing ricochet. If she waited for the JTAC to utter "cleared hot," she'd be too late. "Hog 2-1, Crow cut in, as if sensing what she was about to do. "You do not have—" She thumbed master arm live. Time stretched. The boat was right there in her HUD, wake foaming, tarp bulging with terrified breathing. Farther back in the harbor, a civilian dinghy was drifting but now angled away, no longer directly in her cone. On the pier, the woman pulled the child tighter. "If I let them go, those people under the tarp don't get found again," she thought. "They become leverage. They disappear into somewhere worse than a gun run." She made the choice. "Hog 2-1 in hot," she said, not waiting. She brought the pipper just ahead of the boat's bow, compensating for its speed. Then she squeezed, no more than a heartbeat. The GAU-8 barked, a savage downward snarl. 30-millimeter rounds slapped the water in a tight line, then walked onto the boat's midsection. Wood, or fiberglass, exploded outward. The engine coughed. The boat lurched sideways. The tarp tore. Figures fell, some into the water, some collapsing where they were. She released the trigger immediately and pulled up, climbing back toward safer air, flares popping behind her out of pure reflex. For a long second, the radio was silent. Then Viking said, low and certain, "Target disabled. People in water. We will attempt recovery of non-combatants." It was not the joyous, good hits of earlier. It was the voice of someone who understood exactly what she had just done to her own paperwork. Crow came back, this time formal. "Hog 2-1, Crow. Confirm you executed fires inside the restricted harbor area without ground clearance." She kept her breathing even. "Crow, Hog 2-1. Affirm. I assessed immediate loss of hostages if the boat cleared. I executed a short, controlled gun burst with downward angle. Minimal spill." "Your action is noted," Crow said, clipped. "You will RTB at once for debrief. Say fuel." She checked. Low, but workable. "Fuel is sufficient for RTB to San Martino." Viking cut in again, faster now. "Hog, listen, whatever they say, you stop them. I have eyes on 2 of the ones from under the tarp. They're alive. We're pulling them. You did the right thing." The words hit her harder than the reprimand. She closed her eyes for half a beat behind the visor, then opened them and set her nose toward home. "Copy, Viking," she said quietly. "Good luck with the rest." There would be bodies in the water now. Some guilty, maybe 1 or 2 not. There would be camera phones on the pier. There would be reports. But there would also be hostages on the seal boats who would see another day. She turned out over the Adriatic, leaving the village growing smaller behind her, smoke from the crippled boats drifting like a thin accusation over the water. "Crow, Hog 2-1 is aggressing to base," she said, back to professional. "Battle damage minor, fuel RTB, 1 unauthorized engagement for immediate hostage protection. Ready to copy tasking on landing?" "Roger, Hog 2-1. Expect to be met. Contact approach." Met. Of course. Ops, maybe someone from legal, maybe Ellis trying not to look disappointed. Elena leveled off, saving every drop of fuel. The A-10 purred on, indifferent to ROE, to inquiries, to how many lives had just been shuffled between columns. She had done the thing no one wanted done, so that others wouldn't have to be the one to do it. The runway at San Martino looked narrower than usual when she came back. Low fuel, a dinged hydraulic system, and the weight of what she'd just done made the lights stretch longer than they should have. She put the hog down clean, let it roll, eased the brakes so she didn't stress the wounded system, and turned off onto the taxiway. Ground was all ready, waiting, operations van, maintenance truck, a staff car she didn't usually see on routine returns. Not a mob, but enough to tell her the radio traffic had gotten here before she had. She shut down the engines, canopy popped, evening air washing in. Crew Chief Rivas jogged up, eyes scanning the fuselage. "Ma'am, you took hits." "Yeah," she said, unstrapping. Hide bees low, but she flew fine. Rivas ran a hand along the puncture near the tail, whistled. "She'll live." Then softer. "You good?" "I will be," she said, and climbed down. Major Ellis was at the bottom of the ladder, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "Captain." "Sir." "We'll do maintenance later. Right now, debrief." His tone wasn't angry, just firm. "Bring your helmet and any notes." She followed him to the ops building, boots tapping on concrete, the sunset throwing long shadows over the ramp. Inside, the debrief room smelled of coffee and printer toner. A screen was already up with her mission timeline. Someone had pulled her aircraft's video feed down the pipeline fast. 2 other people waited. A base intel officer she recognized, and a legal rep from the wing, gray suit, narrow eyes. That was new. Ellis gestured her into the seat. "All right. We have your radio traffic with Crow and the JTAC. We're waiting on full BDA from the ground force. Start from overhead on target, specifically the final harbor engagement." Elena set her helmet on the table, visor up, and sat straight. "Yes, sir." She walked them through it, step by step, boats prepping, the first Maverick shot, man-pads threat, mixed evacuation, the hostile craft that hid among civilians, fuel getting low, her aircraft taking fire. She didn't dramatize. She didn't excuse. She just laid it out. "When the final craft departed," she said, "it had what I assessed to be human cargo under a tarp. It was moving to clear the harbor. There was still civilian presence on the pier and a drifting small boat. JTAC was attempting to clear, but was also managing movement. Based on boat speed and geography, I assessed that waiting longer would result in loss of hostages into coastal waters, where I could not safely engage without exposing to additional IR threats. I executed a short, downward gun burst, then ceased." The intel officer typed, eyes flicking. "And you were aware you did not have an explicit, cleared hot at that second?" "Yes," she said, no point pretending. "I was aware." Ellis tilted his head. "Why didn't you hold?" "Because if I held, sir, the people under that tarp don't get recovered. The enemy had already tried to move hostages once. This was their second attempt. We were out of time." The legal rep spoke for the first time. "Captain, are you aware that early BDA from the partner forces indicates at least 2 civilian injuries in the harbor area, non-fatal but hospital care required?" Something inside her sagged, though she kept her face level. "From my pass?" "We can't confirm until we sync the exact timestamps," the legal rep said. "But the window overlaps. There was debris from your strike, and there was small arms fire from the enemy at roughly the same time. It may take analysis to separate." So there it was, the part she couldn't control. You could aim downward and short and still create fragments, still scare a woman on a pier into falling, still have someone get cut on shrapnel. "Understood," she said. Ellis studied her. You know, after Syria, everyone was happy you erred on the side of caution. Yes, sir, she said. Today you didn't. No, sir, she agreed. Today I erred on the side of not letting them vanish with human beings. For a moment, no one spoke. The wing legal rep watched her like a specimen. Ellis's jaw worked, the door cracked, and a comms tech stuck his head in. Sir, we have initial sit rep from the raid force. Put it up, Ellis said. Text popped onto the screen, short, operational. OBJ secured. Multiple enemy KIA, hostages, POIs recovered from harbor. Minor civilian injuries reported. Air support decisive in preventing maritime escape. At the bottom, in a hand-typed line clearly added by someone who'd actually been there, was AC Hog 21 engaged hostile craft at harbor mouth. Action-enabled recovery of 2 non-combatants. Engagement occurred under time-compressed conditions. Ellis read it, then looked back at her. His tone softened half a degree. They're vouching for effect. That JTAC knows what happened, Elena said quietly. Yeah, Ellis said. He sighed. But Hire is still going to want to ask why you shot inside a box. I can tell them why, she said. I'd rather tell them the whole thing than make the JTAC responsible. The legal rep made a note. We'll convene a formal review panel, possibly with regional reps given the civilian aspect. You'll be notified. Formal panel. Exactly the thing she'd been trying to avoid by staying perfect. And yet, sitting here, watching the line enabled recovery of 2 non-combatants, she didn't feel regret, just a tired, heavy clarity. Understood, she said. Ellis closed the file. Get some food. Med will want to check you out. Don't talk to press or partner forces directly. And, Elena, she paused at the door. You kept them from getting away, he said. That's not nothing. It just comes with a bill. She nodded. I know. Outside, the fog had burned off. The base was lit in orange by the setting sun. She could smell the sea again. Somewhere across it, in a shaken village, people were alive because she had said yes to the thing that would now be written up. They didn't wait days. They called it the next afternoon, once all the feeds were pulled and the ground unit was safely out of the Balkans. San Martino didn't have a grand courtroom, so they used a briefing room with bad fluorescent lights and a projector. Captain Elena Markova walked in wearing her flight suit, name tag straight, hair tight. 3 people sat at the table, a U.S. colonel from the regional air component, the base legal officer she'd seen last night, and an Italian liaison officer whose village, technically, had just been shot over. Ellis sat off to the side, not on the panel but clearly invested. Captain, the colonel said, have a seat. She did. On the screen behind them, frozen mid-frame, was her gun camera, the harbor mouth, the hostile boat, spray, her shot. Seeing it from this angle made it look cleaner than it had felt. We're going to step through this, the colonel said. His voice was even, not hostile. Objective here is to determine if your actions were within commander's intent and ROE. You will answer directly. Yes, sir. Start with the final phase. Why did you fire without an explicit clearance from the JTAC? Because I ran out of time, she thought. She said it out loud. Sir, the hostile vessel was carrying what I assessed to be hostages or non-combatants under a tarp. It was exiting the harbor and would soon be out of safe engagement geometry. The JTAC was attempting to clear, but was busy managing civilians. I determined that delay would result in loss of the hostages. The legal officer leaned forward. But you agree you did not hear the words, cleared, hot. I agree, Elena said. So why didn't you wait for them? The Italian officer asked. His English was good but precise. This was a harbor, with our civilians. Because if I waited even 5 seconds more, she said, keeping her tone respectful, the boat would have been masked by coastal features, and I would have had to pursue it low along the shoreline. That would have increased risk to the aircraft and to any other boats. The shot I took was the safest I was going to get. The colonel tapped his pen. Could the ground force have interdicted from shore? Not in time, sir, Elena said. The JTAC told me he did not have a team in position. The legal officer pounced. But is it not true that if the JTAC had cleared you earlier, we might be having a different conversation? She knew the trap. If she said yes, she made the man on the ground, who had just risked his life, look slow. If she said no, she owned the whole thing. It is true that comms were busy, she said. It is also true that the JTAC had to prioritize moving civilians. My decision to fire was mine. You are saying you accept full responsibility for the engagement, the legal officer clarified. Yes, Elena said. I accept it. Ellis's eyes flicked, just once. Approval or maybe just recognition that she wasn't going to throw anyone under a truck. The colonel nodded to the tech at the back. Roll the tape. The gun camera played. Her nose dipping, the boat clearing, the short, surgical burst. On the wide screen, it looked almost textbook. Rounds in a tight string, boat disabled, no wild spray. You couldn't hear the woman on the pier or see the kid. You couldn't feel her fuel ticking down. You couldn't smell the fog. The Italian officer watched closely. We have reports of 2 injured civilians at the pier. Yes, sir, Elena said. I was told that. Do you believe your fire caused those injuries? I believe my fire contributed to a hazardous environment at the harbor mouth, she said. And I believe that if I had not fired, the people under that tarp would not have been recovered. Silence. The colonel steepled his fingers. You understand, this may result in a letter of reprimand, possibly limitation on certain flight duties pending review. I understand, she said. I also understand that the mission objective was to prevent the movement of hostages, and we achieved that. The door opened softly. A young airman slipped a tablet to Ellis, whispered. Ellis glanced, then raised his eyebrows. The colonel noticed. Something relevant, Major? Yes, sir, Ellis said. Sit-rep update from the SOF element, and a forwarded note from the partner liaison in the village. Let's hear it. Ellis read, short and flat. SOF element confirms recovery of 2 adult non-combatants from water following air engagement. Both alive, treated. Partner liaison reports some damage and injured, but we are grateful enemy boats did not take our people. The Italian officer sat back, exhaling through his nose. That clearly was not what he'd expected to hear from his side. The colonel turned back to Elena. This doesn't erase the ROE issue, he said, but it does put it in context. Yes, sir. We will put our findings up the chain, he went on. Until then, you are to remain available. No public statements. Yes, sir. They dismissed her. Outside the briefing room, the corridor was cooler, quieter. As she was walking away, her radio, the secure base one, not her aircraft set, crackled. Hog 2-1, this is Viking 1, relayed through base comms. The JTAC's voice, faint with hops, but still his. Heard you took the heat. She stopped by a window where she could see the sea in the distance. Yeah, she said. I took it. Appreciate you not putting it on us, he said. We were maxed. You saw the shot and you took it. That's what we needed. She let herself smile, small and tired. How are the two from the tarp?" "Shaken," he said. "Alive. That's more than they would have had." The line clicked off. Outcome pending, career in the balance, paperwork coming. None of that had changed. But the people who had actually been in the fight had said thank you. The panel didn't hand down anything dramatic right away. There were notes to write, regional partners to soothe, blurry video from peer phones to collect. Officially, Captain Elena Markova was under review, flying at commander's discretion. Unofficially, the squadron still needed someone who knew how to sit over a messy shoreline and not panic. 2 mornings later, the fog came back, rolling in from the Adriatic just like the day this started. The base looked the same, hangars softened, ramp lights haloed. What had changed was inside her. She stood by the squadron window with a paper cup of coffee and read the translated message the Italian liaison had sent. Short, formal, grateful. Some property was damaged and some people were hurt, but the boat did not take our people. It wasn't an absolution. It was an acknowledgement of trade. Ellis came up beside her. "You saw the message?" "I did," she said. He nodded toward the ramp, where her A-10, patched now where the round had hit, sat with maintenance finishing up. "We can keep you on sims and desk until the review clears if you want." That was the offer. Step back, let the storm pass. Let someone else carry the next impossible choice. She heard again in her head, Viking's voice over relay. "You saw the shot, and you took it. That's what we needed." "If I step back," she said, "the next person might not take it." Ellis eyed her. "That's not necessarily bad." "It is," she said, turning to face him, "if the shot saves people." He studied her for a long breath, then shrugged in a way that said he wouldn't fight her. "Then you pre-flight in an hour. Routine coastal overwatch. No heroics." "Yes, sir." He left her there. She finished her coffee, went to the locker room, pulled on her gear. The motions felt cleaner now, less hesitant. Not because she was unbothered, she wasn't, but because she had decided this was a cost she could carry. Out on the ramp, the morning smelled of jet fuel and wet concrete. Rivas met her at the nose again, same helmet in hand, as if the last sortie had been a regular training flight. "Ma'am," he said, "bird's good. Little scar, but good." "Just like me," she said, and he laughed. As she climbed the ladder, she glanced east. Across that water was a village that would remember her day not as the day an American shot at our harbor, but as the day the boats didn't get away. That nuance wouldn't make headlines. It would live quietly in a few houses, in the stories of 2 people pulled from cold water. She strapped in, powered up. The cockpit lit around her, familiar and welcoming. She ran through checks, fingers steady. She knew now that flying KS over people was never going to be clean. There would always be another harbor with a kid on a pier, another JTAC with too much to juggle, another commander far away asking why you didn't wait 3 more seconds. Staying in this seat meant accepting that sometimes the real sacrifice was agreeing to be the name on the line, so civilians and operators didn't have to wear it. Ground cleared her to taxi. She rolled out, nose pointed toward the same Adriatic, same low clouds. As she lined up, she felt that old pressure across her ribs, the one that said, "You can break something today." But it wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was honest. She pushed the throttles forward. The hog began to move, heavy, sure. She would keep flying,